Welcome, I'm John Delanville, and this is video 32, part 2 in the Calmness in Mind series, where we explore sensible solutions for a calmer life. Now, this video builds upon the last, where you decided what might happen when you die and how you would choose to live this life now. Because being armed with that information will allow you to choose which values and beliefs may help you follow this now path most effectively. And it might also be prudent to rewatch video 18, where we discuss the importance of beliefs and retraining your RAS with all of these new goals and intentions. And remember that to rise above anxiety and depression, we must learn how to think and behave differently. So I think by earnestly exploring what is important to you, there is a huge opportunity for personal growth and profound change within yourself. Now, over the years, as a therapist, I ask many people, what are your values and beliefs? And it always surprised me how few people had seriously considered this question, let alone even taken the time to write them down. So I don't want to get too caught up in the distinctions between what is a value and what is a belief. I think, simply stated, beliefs are convictions that we generally hold to be true, and values are ideals that we hold to be important to us. And as I've mentioned in earlier videos, just because specific values or beliefs were conditioned into us during childhood, it doesn't mean that we can't step back and re-evaluate if they're still serving us well, or check to see if we might need to make some adjustments to suit how we wish to live our lives now and who we would like to become. And I think that changing values can have a powerful effect on recharging our emotional battery as well, which I still believe is one of the foundational requirements to escape anxiety and depression. Let me give you an example. As I implemented NMP, not my problem, as one of my belief systems, which really I think is just the ability to discern where my boundaries of responsibility in any interaction begin and end. This drastically reduced the volume of things that I had to think or worry about. Another justification for exploring your values and beliefs, I think, is to help make decision making faster and easier. Plus, if you know who you are, and you know what you want, and you know where you're going, you can ignore any thought or action that's not in line with those particular goals. So what I'd like to do is take you through a model that I created back in 2005, which I developed to help myself define my own values and beliefs. And just for fun, I've used many of my old values from that time as examples in this particular document. And for those of you who might be interested, I have the progression and development of my values listed on my website, and I'll put a link in the notes below. Now, this process helped me escape my anxious and OCD mind, and it presented me with a really sound foundation that allowed me to transition to this place of more behavioral flexibility and physical calmness. Therefore, I would like to share this process with you. And though it's both challenging and time-consuming, I honestly would encourage you to do this work, because it compels you to think about what you want, and it powerfully conditions your brain into taking those actions. So let me walk you through this process. And the files that I'm showing you here, they will be available for you to download in the notes section below. So here's the document that we'll be using to develop your decision-making framework via the definition of your needs and their relative importance. So the example I'm using here has already been completed, and you'll see that from the data that's all typed in red. So if we scroll down, on the first page, we have a simple description of the process that you can read at your own leisure. And we jump down to the next page, and here we have the first step. And that's revisiting where we left off in the last video, answering the question, what do you think happens when you die? Does life end with death, or does life continue after the body expires? And remember, you can't sit on the fence with this one. Is this life a brief flash in the pan, sandwiched between darkness and eternal nothing? Or does a formless, energetic part of us begin a new chapter in our immortal and infinite journey? The horsey perishes, but the rider rides on. And even if you don't know, and how can you know, pick one option that you believe to be true. Because this will become the perspective that you choose that will influence how you choose to live this life now. Then, as I discussed in the last video, do you wish for your life to have meaning or not? And if relevant, how do you see God, or the godly verse as I call it? Do you want your life to be passive or active? And just tick the statements in the little boxes there that apply to you. And of course, add anything that I may have missed that is important to you. Then as we scroll down, the next step is to begin formulating your needs hierarchy. And what I mean by that is, which aspects of your life need addressing right now? Where is your focus going right now? Are you focusing on that which keeps you stuck, or that which takes you forward? Let me give you an example. If getting a job right now was more important than your health, yet you spent 90% of your day worrying about your health, this is not in line with your actual needs. So from the top box there, we capture which aspects of your life are important to you, over and above anxiety and OCD and depression, the things that they're trying to sabotage you with. And try to prioritize the top 4 and place them in the third table, as you can see here in red. We then look to the middle table to choose which modalities of operation might we use to address those needs. What styles of thinking or behaving would you need to bring to the table for the fulfillment of those particular needs? And we then add these to the bottom table and spend a moment considering and documenting what would the benefits of addressing these needs actually be to you. On the next page, we merge the results from the previous page into a statement of intent that clearly defines what is important to you and your current needs hierarchy. Now at this stage, don't get put off by not knowing how you might achieve these goals. I think we're just being honest with ourselves about what we know needs to happen and how we might like to see the world. I would urge you to try to be optimistic rather than pessimistic, and perhaps set your sights a little higher than usual. I mean, why not? You're worth it. And even if you don't think you are, I do, and I'd love you to give it a try. So try to make this statement of intent compelling. Perhaps share it with your partner or friends and ask them what they might add. But I would suggest that you stay away from sharing it with pessimistic people, because it's likely that they will just pick holes in it and shoot your dreams down. And that's not the path we're going down now. We're looking for trust and optimism as to be things that are becoming more intrinsic within ourselves. Now you might also consider, from which perspective of warrior, settler or nomad are those needs coming from? And which aspect of your personality might the solution be coming from? That's some consideration. Okay, down to the next page. And in this step, we'll begin capturing what beliefs, values or concepts are important to you. And this is achieved by looking through a list of words with the idea of contemplating if that perspective is important to you or not. If not, just strike a line through it. But if your perspective grabs your attention, I would like to ask yourself, is this a value or perspective that's important to me? Yeah. Or you could ask yourself, is this a value or perspective that I wish to change or that I wish to stop? Or could this perspective or value be something that it might be worth me adopting or further developing? And then work your way through the list. Highlight any words that fit any of those previous descriptions. And I really would suggest that you take your time, or even do this with a person who knows you really, really well, so that they can point out anything that you miss, or make sure that you're telling the truth about yourself. Because the unconscious can be a bit sneaky. It can be trying to trick you and present you with a cover story rather than the truth that may lay underneath it. Now, if English is your second language, you may want to translate some of the less familiar words to ensure that you don't miss anything out. Okay, down to the next page. Here we collate all the highlighted words in the table on this page and group together any similar ones. For example, here we have happy, humour and fun. Well, they can be grouped together, as might calmness, being and oneness. Then we mark them with an A if they are an absolute core value, or B if they're just a nice to have value. Okay, next up, we choose the 10 most meaningful values, perspectives or behaviours that might help you handle this period of your life. And then we prioritise them by importance, with the most significant one placed at the top. We then add a sentence describing why these values mean something to you. Then on to the next page, we reflect on what we've learned through the course. And I'd like you to consider if any of my teachings may be helpful to add as a new value or to append to any of your existing values to enhance their effectiveness. Let me give you an example. When I went through this process, I decided to make playfulness and being more rebellious and cheeky a new value of my nomad. Now, of course, my settler didn't like that, but he could see that his nomadic teammate did need that particular outlet in his life. I also upgraded my value of honesty to include the 4 agreement statement of being impeccable with my word, meaning being very truthful in my external conversations and being consciously very nice to myself within my own conscious inner dialogue. Okay, next page. What we now do is we collate all the values and prioritize them and add a brief statement of why that value is important for this stage of our lives. And remember, these can change as you grow. We can revisit them as your life circumstances change. And on this next page is probably one of the most critical stages, so please don't rush it. You're going to write a precise statement of intention about each value in a format that clearly explains why it's important to you, what you used to do, what you will now do, and what having this value may bring to you that is positive. Let me give you an example about that. Let's say honesty was a value. You might write, "This is important as I wish to find my voice and stand up for myself. I used to be scared of conflict or upsetting others, but this just made me anxious and angry on the inside. I will speak honestly, my truth, but I can still be polite, and I do realize that unless I honestly tell people what they need, how can they help me or allow me to become more authentic?" And remember too that values are allowed to contradict each other, based on different circumstances, like behaviors with your family different from how you may behave at work, or varied aspects of your personality that may overlap, such as the nomad being selfish and the settler being caring. These are okay, they can overlap. Okay, moving on to the next page. So you work your way through all of your values, expanding the statement about who you wish to become and how you would like to be. And I'd urge you to really think about what you want, why you want it, and how you might go about getting it. If we scroll down again to the last page, here we gather your perspectives on life from page 5 and remind yourself of your needs hierarchy, which is where you are deciding to place your energy, your awareness, your focus and your activity. And then finally, we close this document by writing 3 or 4 actions, things that you have an intention to do or to achieve over the next 3 months. Write clearly and optimistically about what you want and why. And then spend some time imagining what it might feel like once it has happened. So, that's the process. It's quite a challenge. I think your little 8-year-old is going to try and sabotage you by saying that you're too busy or too tired or that you don't know what you want just yet. And I would say, well, just get on with it, because those who do this work will be very surprised about what happens. Personally, I found it very useful to have those last few pages, and when they were completed, printed out and stuck on the fridge door. I had them on my desk, and this kept them front of mind, and they were there so I could read it each morning and retrain my RAS, the part of my brain, okay, the reticular activating system, which, if you haven't grasped by now, is critical change. And if you're not retraining it daily, then I'd like you to consider that maybe you're being sabotaged by your own unconscious, which I talk about in video 30. And once you have your attitude, your values and your needs hierarchy in place, decision making becomes much simpler. Because if your choice is in line with them, you do it, regardless of how you feel. And if and if they're not in line with them, then you don't do it, regardless of how you feel. It's really ridiculously simple. It was funny revisiting and re-editing this document, as many of the statements that I use here as examples were the actual declarations I made to myself back in 2005. And the first one is especially sentimental because it's about calmness. And back in 2005, I wrote about calmness. I said, I used to worry about everything and how my body always felt. And I said that I want a powerful sense of ease and calmness inside myself, a tranquility that stops me from feeling stressed and allows me to be more objective in the decisions that I make. Perhaps I can begin some form of light meditation, or at least take time each day to relax, plan, and reflect upon the issues of the day. So, it's amazing how far we can come. And this process was pivotal and motivational in me changing. I know even have a company called Calmness in Mind. I guess what I'm saying is this stuff really works, but knowing it is very different from actually sitting down and doing it. Okay, so I'll place 2 documents in the notes section below, and you'll be able to download them. One will be a completed document like I've used here in this example to give you ideas, and the other is a blank document that you can use as a template to guide you through the process, where you can just fill in all your information. I'll also save them in Word, Pages and PDF formats to try to make them more accessible to you. Okay then, let's get a little serious. What I'm about to say is very deep, extremely subtle and very important. Some of our existing beliefs, often developed in childhood, may be so untrue that it's almost ridiculous, yet we still believe them. Let me try and give you an example. My younger brother has an almost photographic memory, and growing up alongside him made me believe that my memory was terrible, which inferred that it was hard for me to learn, to revise, or to pass exams. And this belief that was formed led me to not try very hard at learning in school because I believed that I wasn't very clever. Therefore, my beliefs affected my effort, which affected my outcomes because I failed most of my exams because I didn't try. And failing my exams proved back to me that my belief of not being clever was true. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. In truth, I had an excellent memory compared to others, just not as good as my brothers. And these days, I marvel at my memory. I see myself as very clever, and I love to learn and I love to create. I sometimes wonder what might have happened if I'd realized this whilst I was in school, and if I'd paid more attention, if I'd worked harder, or if I'd had bigger dreams. Equally, I wonder if going through all the OCD torment was what enabled me to become who I've become. I think either way, it doesn't matter. But you can see how a belief system may be based on a misconception that you think is true, that influences your behaviors to move back from rather than forward into your dreams. Let me give you another couple of examples. When she was 9, my partner sneaked into the grounds of a mental institution as a dare from her friend. And she crept up to one of the windows and she peered in, and she saw a potter's wheel and she said to herself, wow, a potter's wheel, this is where I want to be. How can I get in here? Can you see the unconscious brain's potential association? And remember, the unconscious brain works by pattern matching. Like mental institutions are where people can do pottery. We've got to be careful about what we think. But when we look back on our childhood, we can often see where many of these patterns were formed. At 11, she won a national art competition, and she had all her paintings up on the school hallways. She got A's in all her art exams, yet she still, in her words, wished she could be an artist. All the proof was right in front of her, but she didn't have the belief that she was an artist, or even the belief that she could be one. In addition, her parental conditioning had her believe that being an artist wasn't a proper job, which her school careers advisor also confirmed. Now, this is ironically quite hilarious, as after 35 years of doing a job that she convinced herself she liked because she was successful at it, she's now become an artist and she's loving it. If only she'd known how powerful a belief system could be when she was at school. Now, as I said in video 28, the power of belief systems and clear intentions ought to be taught in schools. But I think if they were, the world will be full of happy and healthy people living their dreams, which sadly are not the goals of those who are in positions of health guidance and governance over us. However, there is some good news. We can change an old belief system, or we can add a new belief system. It just takes the effort to step back and ask ourselves, are our existing belief systems true? Okay? Or are they just the unlucky programming from childhood or the events around us or who we happen to hang out with? One of my pivotal points in recovery to calmness was reading the book The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I know I've mentioned this many times, but I mention it because it works. And I used those four statements as a temporary belief system for 6 months. And my life changed drastically for the better. Perhaps you could do the same. I stopped making assumptions and I asked people what they actually wanted rather than guessing. I stopped taking things personally. What anybody says to me and of me is none of my business. I became impeccable with my word, as I mentioned earlier. And I tried to do my best in any moment, knowing that my best was a variable dependent on the resources I had in that moment. And I promise you, this stuff works if you put the time and effort in to decide what you want to do. Now, in this final section of the video, I would like to share a simple yet powerful model that I found to be useful on many levels, including how to understand myself better, how to generate more behavioral flexibility, and how to optimize my creativity. I call it the leap model, as it enables us to leap from one positionality or type of behavior to another in seconds. And because you're consciously aware of the new stance that you've adopted, your mind is kept free of any conflicting stories that you ought to be doing something else. Let me try and explain. If we draw a graph and on the y-axis define a behavior scale representing how passive or active a person is, whilst on the x-axis we describe if that person is more logical or emotional in the way that they respond to life. And of course I'm being very, very genetic and straightforward here. But to give you some examples, a person who is logical and passive might suit a job such as a research analyst, whereas somebody who's logical and active, those behaviors may be that of a company director, managing director or CEO. Yeah. They too may have an emotional side, but usually those emotions can be pushed down or pushed to one side so they can take logical, rational action in any moment. If we jump to the quadrant defined by passive and emotional, perhaps we could put some types of monks. They may be located there, especially if they're spending hours in silent meditation each day. And finally, in the active and emotional quadrant, we might find entrepreneurs and adventurers who are following their hearts, driven by their gut feelings of emotion and excitement. And as I've been reminding you throughout this course, we're all different. Yeah? And even varied aspects of ourselves can be distinctive in their individual needs. So it might be worth contemplating where you might place yourself in this framework. Yeah? Or consider where you were before you had anxiety or depression, or where you feel emotionally or think logically you might operate from as you get yourself back onto a more even keel. Back when I started my recovery back to calmness, one of my goals was to be able to consciously move into any quadrant as my needs required in that moment, be they passively and emotionally calm, like reading a book, or active and logical when choosing to make something happen. But as I've said many times in this course, when you consciously choose to operate from one of those quadrants, don't listen to your little 8-year-old who's always trying to pull you back into her comfort zone. Okay, let's clean that away. What if we observe this framework in another way? If we overlay the warrior personality type from video 16, you can see the typical space that they operate from. You'll see it's not very natural for them to be too passive or even too emotional. Something else I should have mentioned earlier is don't get caught up with the image that a warrior needs to be strong, aggressive, or intimidating. They can be calm, gentle, assertive, or they can be quiet and inspirational and determined. There are many ways to become more responsible for your choices and the actions and outcomes in your life. Now, suppose we overlay the nomad's preferred operational area. In that case, we can see that they are emotional, often very active, but they can also chill out and do nothing far easier than the warrior can. And finally, if we overlay the settler's preferred behavioral positionality, it might look a bit like this. Although some settlers may be more active, logical, or emotional, and if that's you, perhaps you are a warrior or a nomad masquerading as a settler. And I think many people who believe they are settlers have in fact hugely repressed warriors or nomads, which causes much of their underlying anxiety through their own inner conflicts. And it may be interesting to explore how these archetypal personas interact with each other as well. Because nomads don't really like warriors because they're too serious. And warriors don't like nomads because they can't be controlled. But warriors tolerate settlers because they can be made to do things. And settlers like warriors because they set boundaries, protect them, and help them to make decisions. And often, a person may experience these self-conflicts through an inner feeling of guilt. An example may be an inner warrior feeling that they ought to be active, while the inner nomad is happy doing nothing or being indulgent. And I can hope you can see what I'm pointing to here. Okay, let's shake this up again and observe this model from another simplistic perspective, that of common mental health or personality issues. Perhaps in the passive and emotional quadrant, we might place depression, whereby simply becoming more active and logical, the things in your life may begin to improve, even though you might not feel like pretending to be active or logical. Then OCD typically falls into the passive and logical quadrant, because though they think they're being active and logical, it's just within the framework of being stuck and doing OCD thinking and OCD compulsions, rather than getting on with being logical and active, moving towards the expansion of their lives. In the active and logical corner, we might place a person with Asperger's, where they have a huge potential for getting things done in an absolute rational and logical manner. And then finally, in the lower right quadrant, based on active emotional behavior, we have those individuals with ADD or ADHD, which I discussed in video 31. However, we also have those with pure O type of OCD, where there are intrusive thoughts but no perceived active compulsions, because their compulsions are to avoid things like knives, people, or places. And it's a theory of mine that pure O affects repressed nomads, whereas conventional OCD affects repressed warriors. And I think there's a small group of smart individuals with super complex personalities who have both a repressed nomad and a repressed warrior, with OCD and pure O. And these guys can often become mentally and physically very trapped until they can sort of separate and untangle their complex personalities into smaller, more manageable parts, starting with the differing needs between the warrior and the settler and the nomad. As ever, anxiety resides beneath all these conditions. And remember, anxiety is the symptom. The cause is emotional exhaustion, worrying too much, being too controlling, pessimism, doubt, loneliness, childhood conditioning, trapped trauma, situational discomfort not being addressed, and other poor lifestyle choices. So if this model interests you, you might want to explore other things. Which sector has become your comfort zone, and is it serving you well? Then which sector does your anxiety take you into when it consumes you? Do you become dominant like a warrior, victim like a settler, or excessive and hedonistic like a nomad? Then next up, we ask, for your life to improve, which quadrants might be worth stepping into or out of for a certain period of time? Then what stories or beliefs are holding you back from behaving in a more flexible format? Things like I'm too shy, or it might embarrass me, or I don't want to upset other people. And perhaps another way to use this framework is to map your family members on this graph to see which sectors they operate from, to scrutinize how you may have been programmed, and how might be the best way that you can communicate with them. At one point in my own recovery, it dawned upon me that this simple model was a powerful representation of the full range of human behavior. And by defining my comfort zone, it beautifully highlighted all the areas of potential growth available to me during my short time here in Earth School. In an ideal world, I should be able to be passive or active. I should be able to be emotional or logical, loud or quiet, introverted or extroverted, strong or gentle, attached or detached. And the degree to which I can consciously move to any point on this chart and still function reasonably well is the degree to which I have become all I can become, regardless of any other achievements in my life. Therefore, if I wanted to grow as a person, it wouldn't be achieved by avoiding what made my mind or my body anxious. Quite the opposite. I would need to courageously accept my vulnerability and step out into those other quadrants. I would need to tolerate the discomfort. I would need to retrain my mind and body and acquire the new skills to make myself more whole in any area. However, the ego, the protective personality, the little 8-year-old, he's not going to like that, But that's not my problem. It's his problem, okay? And I don't need to listen to him anymore. And of course, what I'm describing is ERP, exposure and response therapy. Maybe even stop focusing ERP on the OCD and just apply ERP to your whole life, okay? Let's save time and just cut out the middleman, okay? This is why I keep asking you, what do you want from life? Who do you want to become? What beliefs do you have about yourself? Because this is the most practical and common sense way to move forward. And if you're not sure yet, that's okay. Just emulate the dreams and beliefs of those around you or people who inspired you. Copy them until you do know what you want to do. It took me until I was 41, until I knew what I wanted. And even now, it's always evolving. Of course it is. It can't really be any other way. And finally, I'd like to share a discovery I made about myself a few years back, which helped me to become far more creative and to stop, well, not to stop procrastinating, but to procrastinate less. And because a lot of my OCD was due to my seeing myself as a settler, but in truth having a repressed warrior and a hugely repressed nomad, this meant that I had this combined superpower of extreme logic and intense emotions that I spoke about earlier on. Of course, back then, that tied me in knots, and I unknowingly used that superpower to perfect my anxiety and OCD and my depression, which led to fear, misery, sadness, and huge bouts of procrastination. However, once I could step into my warrior or my settler or my nomad personalities as I needed them, and as they became a team rather than fighting each other, I still had to learn how to optimize their combined creativity and productivity. And it took me quite a while to recognize, but this is what I learned about my own creative process. Each time I sat down to be creative, I would have lots of ideas, maybe even too many ideas, but I struggled to produce anything. And this caused a lot of annoyance and procrastination within myself. It was almost as if I couldn't start a process unless I could see the whole project in my mind, and therefore I thought I would know if it would work or not. And this caused so much frustration and procrastination. But because I have a lot of tenacity, I would plow on, I would keep thinking and trying stuff, and even though nothing good was being produced. And then one day I would sit down and for a couple of days I would just be super productive. I would be logical and rational, and ideas would just flow out of me, and my motivation would be wonderful. Then on about the third day, it would all just disappear. Okay? And unknowingly I would return to that place of passiveness, frustration, procrastination, and dismay as to where's all my creativity gone to. And then after a few more days of procrastination, I would suddenly become creative again, but this time with an emotional bias. And I'd be exploring how things might look and feel, and what colour they will be, and how will people feel about this. And once again, I'd be highly productive for a couple of days, and then that would sort of dissipate, and I would be back into this passive procrastination again. Then a few days later, and all of a sudden, I would become super active, and work would just flow out of me until it was all finished in a super fast time and of a reasonably high quality that often surprised me. So I set about trying to understand how my brain's creativity worked. And once I pulled it apart, it was obvious, really. At the start of a project, my conscious mind would consider all the options and the outcomes required, and those specifications would then be passed to my unconscious mind to be processed and actioned. And after a while, my warrior logical mind would take over, and it would analyze all the options, and they would all then be processed by the unconscious mind before it was passed to my nomad emotional mind for more processing from a different perspective. Then finally, it was all analysed, reconstructed into a final piece of work that could just flow out of me actively in a single burst of balanced work, nicely balanced between logical and emotional. And upon knowing this, knowing how my brain was functioning, I was able to fast track my mind by directly going into each of those steps. Choosing to be logical and rational, and another day choosing to be emotional, and that really sped up my process of creativity. Now, that's just the way my brain works, and I'd certainly encourage you to explore how yours might operate. And my top tip for you would be to develop the process of trusting the power of your unconscious mind to come up with great ideas, and to keep your conscious mind empty and quiet enough for those ideas to appear within. Okay, a quick summary. Download the 2 files in the notes section below and start the process of generating a decision-making process via your views on life, your needs hierarchy, and your new values and beliefs. Write it all down, print it out, share it with those around you, and keep reading it each day to retrain your RAS, the reticular activation system, into knowing what you want and why. Consider where in the LEAP model your comfort zone resides, then step out boldly. ERP yourself into other quadrants and just see what happens. You'll be surprised. The world won't end. Okay, in the next video we're getting back to exploring how to quieten the mind and calm the body. But until then, don't underestimate how powerful completing this particular exercise will be, and how knowing who you think you want to be, the unconscious mind will start to take you in there. Once again, thank you for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.